Welcome back. Due to somewhat popular demand, I've decided to dedicate a full episode to go through in detail the process of making a moving eyebrow mechanism for your puppet. A couple of episodes ago with Dr Cecil, I quickly touched upon how I made a moving eyebrow mechanism for him using very cheap supplies that you have around the house, and a few people said that they would like that ironed out in a bit more detail, so that's what we're going to do today. Join me as I go around the country to family members' houses who have the tools that I do not have in order to make this mechanism for you and show you how it works. Some of these things are a bit hard to cut out if you're as weak as me. So I have done the only thing that I can do in a situation like this, and that is to come to the home of a family member who owns a garage, or at least a room with some tools that I can steal. We won't be using many tools for this project, but I do need something a bit stronger than these pliers. So let's crack on. So the aim here really is the cheaper the better, and it's not about necessarily spending less money as much as it is about the quality of the coat hanger that we need. The worse the better is absolutely the motto here. You see this, I picked this up from TK Maxx. I think it was a pack of 8 for £6. And although it's great and wiry, it is still a little bit thick. If you can't manage to find anything else, it will do the job. But ideally, you want one of these proper old, really crap, thin coat hangers. It's still got a bit of sturdiness, but it's really easy to cut just in case you don't have a garage on hand should you need one. I have also in the past, and I will again, be using this as an arm rod, this long bit of the coat hanger, but I just think if you can, I would much rather you get this one. This one is really old, really thin and really bad, and those are the qualities we're looking for today. At the recommendation of the man who owns this garage, he said I should use these, and I don't know what they are. I think they're bolt cutters. I'm going to go ahead and give these a go. I've already used them to cut this one, the thicker one that I've warned you is quite thick, and it did work, but I am also aware that a lot of people won't have this on hand. So I'm going to personally use this bolt thing to cut this, though I do think it can be cut with different things because it is thin and bad. I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't eventually, if you persevered hard enough, cut it with one of these if you just kept wiggling it around. But for speed and ease, I'm going to cut it with this big thing here. I'll cut it in a moment, but before I do, I just want to explain again the shape that we're going to be aiming for. So the idea, I'll put something here, like a little diagram, is you have a straight line where your eye is going to sit, and then you have a handle that we're going to use to operate once it's in the puppet with our finger and push it up and down so that the eyebrows move but the eyes stay in the same place. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to cut this long line here. This is the bit we want, this bit doesn't matter. We're going to cut this long line here, and I'm going to fold it in half, hopefully, once I've cut it. I don't know how much strength that will need. So I'm going to cut this long line here and try and keep it as straight as possible. Press that down. Hell yeah. That was nice and easy actually. I think with how thin this is, if you found like a proper old shabby one, you could cut it out with something less drastic than what I'm using. There we go, and that's cut into place. So now we've got our nice straight line. It's important to keep your tools tidy, especially when they're not yours, but I don't know where I got this from. I'll just place it down there nicely. Okay, now we've got a straight line. We're going to try our very best to bend it and fold it over in half as perfectly as you can, but it doesn't matter too much if you get it a little bit on the wonk. Hold it down with a pair of pliers that I've found, and to the best of my ability, you see how wonky I've got that, but that's fine. Bend it as much as I can. And we should have something like that. Hopefully when you do yours, it will be a lot more even than I've done it. And now I've bent it in half, I'm just gonna compress the ends so that they sit alongside each other a little bit more. So now I've got this here, and this long piece is going to be our handle, and eventually when it's in the skull you'll be able to grab it with your finger and pull it up and down, and that's how you'll be able to operate the eye system. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, at a certain point, bend each side that we've got here that way and that way so that our eyes can sit on it. It's important to note, depending on what skull shape you're using, that you might have to have a different length of handle. If you're doing a more sort of melony shape, you've got to think how compressed the head is, so you won't actually be able to fit a very long handle. So it's all about how long your puppet head is as to how long you make this bit here. So what I'm going to do now is bend this bit out to the left like that, and then this bit out. Try and keep that, I haven't done that very well, but try and keep that as even as you can, and if you haven't kept it even, that's fine. We pride ourselves on mistakes. So you should have something a little bit like this, and the next step is to get the eyeballs that you're going to use, and we're going to attach them to these flat bits here. I like to use felt balls. You can use ping pong balls or wooden balls that you paint later on, but you've got to make sure that they're full balls. Don't just cut them in half like you usually would if you're doing puppet eyes. You've got to have a whole ball. Now we come to the conversation of eyeballs, and this is a really personal preference kind of thing. Some people use ping pong balls or wooden balls cut in half and painted white. I'm personally not much of a fan of that look, so what I like to use is felt balls. I think they suit the aesthetics of a puppet much better because you're already dealing with a being that's made of material. So I much prefer to use these. You can totally use whatever spherical shaped object you want, just as long as it's possible for us to put a hole through the very middle of it. When you put a hole in the eyeball of your choice, it is really important to get it as much in the middle of the eye that you're using as possible, because when we secure the eyeball, we're going to stick it all the way around the side, and if it's not completely even, you might catch it trying to move with the eyebrow mechanism. So the more in the middle it is, the more it stands a chance of staying still. Because I use felt balls, they're not perfectly circular anyway, so as long as you get it as much to the accuracy that you can, that's the main goal. And all I do is I get, is it called a darning needle? You know, like a really fat sewing needle that some people use for knitting. I get one of those and I poke a hole into my felt ball here. It takes time, all right, but you just have to wiggle it around and feed it through to the other side, just like that. Bring it out, and as I bring it out, I'm just wiggling it around and around and around, and I keep going through it just to make that hole bigger and to make sure that I'm coming out in the same place every time and I'm not making loads of little holes inside the ball. It takes a bit of work and it is a bit fiddly, and if you find your needle getting stuck, just grab some pliers and bring it back out, and then you can always send it back in with those pliers. You can see we've got the hole in the middle there. This might be a bit tricky and I ask you to persevere, but hopefully Past Me has shown you how I get the balls into my ball, and that is with a very thick needle that I spend a long time rummaging around in the middle there to give a bit of a gap. If you're using ping pong balls or wooden balls, I think ping pong balls you could still use a needle, but for a wooden ball you'd need to drill a tiny little hole in it, nothing crazy, because we don't want them to move very much when they're on our little thing. So just try your best to get a little hole through the middle of whatever ball thing you're using for this, and all I'm going to do is work it through like that and place it here like this. So you can see how, although it can fit, it's not really moving around, and that's going to stay where it is. And we're just going to add one more to the other side. So I've pierced my balls now onto this thing here, and you can see how I've managed to, try as I might, get it as much in the middle of the ball as possible, this piercing here, because if it's not in the middle of the shape that you're using, as you lift the eyebrows up and down, you might get a little bit of movement in the actual eye socket, which we ideally don't want. We just want the eyebrows to be moving here. So try and get it as in the middle as possible, but I'm also going to sew and stick mine into the mask, so if you have got it a bit dodgy, we can save it. So we've got this now, and these bits here are going to be used for our eyebrows, and this is a personal preference moment. If you wanted a monobrow, you could bring these over, connect it together in the middle and have a flat thing with material moving up and down for a monobrow. But if you want two separate eyebrows, like I'm going to go for today, we're just going to curl these over separately so they sit separately, and we'll make two different material coverings for each one, and then you'll have separate eyebrows. I don't want to give my eyes much wiggle room. I don't want them to be moving up and down as they please, so I'm going to try and turn this wire immediately after my ball finishes. So I'm just going to turn it up like this, just like that, and then I'm going to curve the top part into the shape of the eyebrow that I want, just like that. So I'm going to do the same to the other side, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this excess here and just give them a little bit of reshaping until I'm happy with how they're sitting. Okay, so this is the shape that I'm going to work with for now. So you can see that we've got our eyebrow bones here, which are going to be the support. We've got our handle down here, and we've got our actual eyeballs. Eventually, all it will take inside the skull is for you to go up and down like this with your finger. You can see how the eyeball that I'm holding on to is staying still because it will be glued in, but the eyebrow is moving up and down, and that's going to be the mechanism inside your puppet. So now it's time to put it in place. Okay, so I've made a bit of a base at my family member's house, and I'm going to put in the eyes now. I made last night this little guy. I don't know his name yet, but I thought he would be a really good example for what we're trying to pull off today. So you can see that he's mostly stitched up, but I have left open a little gap at the top, and I'm going to make an incision all the way down this fabric here and along here like a cross, so we can perform our operation today. This procedure can be a bit tricky, so please take your time. Don't worry if it doesn't look right. It's totally salvageable. I also chose red fluff today because although you can use fleece for this, I much prefer to have something with a bit of texture that hides any mistakes or stitches that I make, and a really good way to hide it is to use a fluffy fabric, though it does get everywhere. So I'm just making an incision down the face and along the eye line. You can also put in the mechanism first and then put your fleece around it, but I like to do this because I like to tuck the fabric underneath the eyes as I stick them, and I think it just looks a bit more seamless that way. So we've opened him up and we're ready to perform a bit of surgery, and I'm going to pin back these flaps I'm going to pin back these flaps so that they don't bother me very much. This entire show is just me saying incredibly inappropriate things in the purest way. And what I'm going to do now is get our mechanism that we've made, and I need to line up roughly where I want the eyes to sit. And as I was saying earlier, it's really important to factor your handle into this motion. You can see how his head is nice and long, so I'm going to be able to get a lot of turning out of him. But if he was a different shape, like sort of Melanie, or a bit squishier, you'd have to make your handle a lot shorter to be able to manage the space you have in the head itself. So all I'm going to do is just line up roughly where I want my eyes to sit, factoring in the length of the handle that will be inside the skull. And once I've got roughly where I want them to go, I'm just going to make a little dot through each eye. And I know roughly we want them in this sort of height area. So what I'm going to do now is cut into this foam and make a shape that sort of resembles a villain eye mask. That, you know, that sort of cartoony figure of 8 sort of shape. I'll show you. But that is what I'm going to cut out into this so we can fit these comfortably. Also, when you line these up to figure out where you want them to go, just do a little dot at the top of each eyeball so you know the sort of circumference of this villain eye mask that you need to cut out, and be very careful not to get black Sharpie on your white eyes. This is a true testament to fluff getting everywhere, but hopefully through the haze of red you can see where I've pointed out roughly where I need my shape to be. I'm going to connect these dots together that I've drawn here like this, and I'm going to cut this shape out. So get in that foam with your scissors and start stabbing away, and eventually you can work into that shape that we've roughly drawn. We just want a rough shape into the skull, and I know it might feel a bit scary and unnatural to cut a shape this size into your head, but we've just got to keep the faith and know that it will look okay when we're done with it. And there we are. Now we've got this gaping chasm in the face of our puppet. We're now going to insert our mechanism. Make sure as well that you're happy roughly with the shape that your eyebrows are looking like. You can bend them and change them however you want. And as I said earlier as well, if you wanted a monobrow situation, all you would do is not cut off the excess length that I did and solidify those together with some tape or anything that you've got, and that can be your monobrow base. So all I'm going to do is place this in, and I want my eyeballs to rest in the edge of that curvature here, but I want my eyebrow mechanism to be on the outside of the foam. So it's really important that when you stick this in place, we keep our mechanism outside. You can see this is where they're going to sit, and what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to curl in those bits of fabric that I cut out. That's a personal preference. I just like how it looks when the fabric is tucked underneath the eye. You totally don't have to do that. You can just stitch it up around it, but I just like to push it in so that it gives a little bit more of an effect, if you know what I mean. So as much as I can, I'm just going to tuck in that fabric that we've cut, leaving the eyebrow mechanism outside of it. I'm going to tuck it into this shape that we've made, but this is roughly what you should have. So I've got my fabric tucked under as much as I can, and all I'm going to do now is glue my eyeballs around the edge of that gap that I've made. And although I glued this in with fabric glue, which I like to do as I'm working on it just to keep it in place and let it sort of set, I do solidify the whole thing with hot glue, so make sure you've got some hot glue on you. And as I glue it in, I'm just going to push some pins through the eyeballs into the skull Sorry, fluff is in my throat. I've put the glue underneath the fabric that I've curled in, and then I've put the glue on top of the fabric that I've curled in so that the eye has something to stick to. I've got one eye that's been glued and is resting in place, and I'm now going to do the same to the other eye over here. Alright, so his eyes are drying in place, and while I let those eyes dry, I'm just going to stitch up the top of his head, and then we'll get to making an eyebrow cover for the mechanism. So I've glued in my eyes temporarily here. We will be gluing them in a little bit better, and I've also done one side of the puppet so you can kind of see what we're aiming for. But now the next step is hot glue. So get your glue guns out if you haven't already. It might not make sense that I put fabric glue on it first and then hot glue it, but I don't put the fabric on with the intention of that being the glue. I just put it on to get it in place roughly. So I'll only hot glue one eye at one time, just because if I'm working on this one and this one moves around a little bit, I might want to change that up afterwards, and the fabric glue is really easily detachable. I'm going to remove these pins that I've placed in to keep the eyes still, and I've got my glue gun here, and I'm just going to give it a little wiggle, and anywhere that's a bit loose or we want to change completely, that's where I'm going to put the hot glue, just to give it a little bit of extra something to hold on to as it sits in there. So I'm just going to fill in those gaps. I'm going to wait for this to get hot enough and then I'm going to fill in those gaps. And in the meantime, we can have a look at the mechanism I've already done. So you can see that I've got this sort of shape here that I've gone for, this rounded eyelid. I would like to point out, you could do any shape. I feel like I say that a lot, but you could. You can do any skeleton shape you can think of for your character. The world is endless, the dreams are yours. But I did this shape, just a typical eyebrow. It might be easier to see here from the side, but you can see that eyebrow starting to work. It will look a little bit better when we've solidified this hole here. Okay, so the glue is ready now, and I'm going to do my best with a POV that you can see to glue in the top of my eyeball. As I glue it, I'm tucking in the bit of fabric that we cut out so that it covers the entire eyeball if the eyebrows are lifted. Just going to feed that glue in that hole there and press that down onto the eyeball, and there's a little loose bit here at the bottom, so I'll do the same for that as well. While that's drying, keep your glue gun on because we're going to need it for the actual eyelid. This bit is kind of dependent on the shape that you've made. If you're making a monobrow, you can make just one big long oval and fold that over the barrier that you've made for the endoskeleton. But with this shape, I'm kind of going for like a rounded single oval because it is a singular eyelid, but it very much depends on the shape that you've chosen on this very day. So what I've got here is just a scrap of red fluff, and the red fluff is getting everywhere. On reflection, it probably wasn't the most practical choice, but I've got this red fluff and I'm going to cut it in a curvature shape. So we've kind of got a long ovally shape when we're finished with it. So I've cut that sort of size of a shape. If you are using fluff as well, check where the direction of the fluff that you've cut out is going and if you're happy with it. Sometimes you can cut out just a shape of fabric and you think it's all good, but actually the direction of the fluff that you're using isn't correct. So just make sure you're happy with the placement of your fluff if you are using fluff. As a rough placement here, you can see what it would look like if I curved it over like that very roughly. You have that sort of angular round shape here, and it kind of makes an eyebrow bone as much as you want it to before the eyebrow actually comes out. And what I'm going to do, it's a little bit fiddly, but we're going to bring this bit of fabric here all the way up at the back to sit underneath the eyelid, because when you open up your eyes, you don't want to see the bottom of the bit of fabric and just a bit of roughness. You want to see the fabric all the way. You want everything to be covered. So I'm going to bring this bit of fabric up upside down like this, and the aim is we're going to make sure this wire is covered as much as we can by folding it over like this and placing it at the top here, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line my bit of fabric that I've got up here to a place where I'm happy with it, and make sure when you are placing it that your endoskeleton is at its place of rest. Bring it to its furthest point so that we know the fabric is definitely going to cover it. So all we're going to do is place this bit of fabric down, and I'm going to put a little layer of hot glue on this. It helps a lot if you rough it up a little bit. If you've got still a smooth surface of what was a clothes hanger, just give it a little bit of a dust or a sand or a scratch and try and get it a little bit rough so that the glue sticks on a little bit better. So I'm just going to put a thin layer of hot glue here, and then I'm going to fold this over and press it so it's really nice and tight on that bone. Trying as well as I go on the side here to cover up that bit of side bone as well. You see how that's a bit exposed, and then if I just bring that over like that, that's covered. That's all we need to do. Just gonna very lightly, try not to let it dribble, place some hot glue, and I'm gonna bring this back up bit to the placement where I want the eyebrow to start, and I'm gonna pull the fabric over the mechanism, and I'm gonna press with my fingers. Be careful, because sometimes the hotness can come through the fabric that you're using if it's quite thin. And you can see already the difference that has made, and we've now given him a rough shape of his eyebrow. And all that's left to do is to connect this in a neater way. We're going to be sewing up this gap as well. So now all I'm going to do is refine this shape up here. If you're using a fluff, you can hide it a lot better, but if you're using a fleece, you see we've got the edge of the fabric here. We don't want to see any seam lines, and also the fabric can fray a lot if you don't turn it over. So what I'm going to do is fold that loose end here like that and give the shape a really nice curvature, and I'm going to sew. And you could actually glue, but I'm going to sew. You can see a lot more of a seamless line than if I were to just leave it open like that. That's what we're going to do now. I'm going to sew around the edge of my eyebrow. All right, there we go. His second eyebrow is on. Here he is. This is what he's looking like at the minute. He's a bit slapdash, but I've tried my best. And what I'm going to do now is quickly decorate him with an eyeball so you can get a sort of sense of what it will look like. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to secure this gap here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring these bits down and sew them together, because I want him to look a little bit angry, but it's totally up to you. You could get a puppet nose at this point. I will be teaching puppet noses very soon, and put it in between these bits of material here so it kind of sits like that. I think I've made a bit of a cursed Elmo. I'm not going to put a nose in today just because I'm showing you something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decorate this eye here with this pupil, and I'm going to sew these bits together. I've just quickly made a pupil much like the other one, and I'm just going to put that on quickly. So there he is at the moment, just like that. And now we're going to sew up these bits that we just spoke about. And like I say, if you wanted to, I would cut this open a little bit more and put a nose in here. All I'm going to do is bring these top points of my fabric together and try and connect them through this gap here to try and sew it up a little bit. If you are using a forgiving fabric and you don't want to change this shape that you've got here, you could add a little bit extra in. It's important to note here that when you're doing this bit, make sure your eyebrow mechanism is as taut as possible and open so that the fabric is already stretched, and we don't run the risk of making the eyebrows move less with the tautness of how we're doing this. Okay, so I brought him down a little bit here and I've closed off that gap. I'm now just going to sew this little front bit together, but like I say, if you wanted to add a nose, this would be the perfect opportunity to put one here. So bear in mind, he's very slapdash and I only made him as an example, but here he is. This is what he'll look like. You'll definitely get a lot more expression the more that brow bone brings out in the front. So ideally, as you place in this mechanism, you want those brow bones to be directly in front of those eyeballs so that when you pull it up, it gets as much opening as it possibly can. So there we have it, another mystery solved by an ignorant woman who should know more. Join me next time on one of my tutorials. See you later, enjoy.